So first and foremost, good morning everyone, and heartfelt thank you to the team at WIRC and Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for inviting me here. And as a staff member of NSE, it's my duty to warmly welcome all of you to this epicenter of capital markets. So I hope you have a day filled with learning. And before I get started, the topic, small is the new big, I'd like to set it in context here. I see a mix of faces, both young and relatively older people. So those of you who have been a 90s kid, I'd like to show two images here before we get started. Does this image ring a bell? Ek chidiya anek chidiya, right? While we had heard that song, it was more about unity, right? And the point which I'm trying to make here is that if we were another one more image before I get to my point, this is that a normal curve, right? So if we were to look at India in terms of both consumers as middle class or as enterprises, a typical normal curve distribution comes. You have one which are really the larger enterprises or the ultra high net worth, and you have really the extremely poor. But what often misses our attention is the fat middle, that there is a very large middle, and what SMEs somewhere I can say are representative of that middle, right? So the point which I'm trying to make here is that the operational word being collective, right? As an individual enterprise or as an individual consumer or as an individual, right? Unit economics may not work. As an individual, an enterprise may be someone which a median turnover probably of 5 to 10 crores, which employs probably about 8 to 10 people. But when you aggregate these together, that's when you have that middle, which is essentially the backbone, right? And that's what we are going to be talking about. That small is the big, the new big, in terms of the overall collective strength which it adds to the economy. Now, having said this in perspective, there is potential, like what Ankit sir had mentioned in his opening remarks. Again, if we were to just look at the potential, so if we are looking at listing 10,000 of these SMEs, there's a 50x potential. If we were to look at the data from the MSMED department, out of the total number of Udyam registrations, I just look at the ones which are classified under the medium category, which is the largest among the micro, small and medium enterprises. We have about 69,000 plus medium enterprises. We are at 600 SMEs which are listed, right? Collectively, both the exchanges together have about 1,100 SMEs which are listed. So that's about 2% of just the medium, right? But having said which, I think we should, I'll ask just two questions here since I have all the brains among us fellow chartered accountants. Do all the companies, all the auditees who are, whose books you audit, right, would you be able to classify them homogeneously, that everyone is showing the right picture, right? Or is everyone similar? Or would you want to make a differentiation, and that differentiation comes after you have audited, after you have seen the books of accounts? So my question is, can you paint all of them with the same brush? Right, to the members here of WIRC, we are a part of the same family of practicing chartered accountants or members of that. Again, like sir said, we do have some outliers, we do have some black sheep in the family as well. So again, with the prestigious degree, we cannot paint our own fraternity in the same brush. So then, can we paint the entire SME opportunity here in the same brush? We can't. And that is where the role of a bottom-up analysis comes into play. That yes, there is an opportunity, there is a huge market, there is a potential, we have a long way to go. Globally also, if you were to see, put things in perspective, the promise is in Indian markets. But having said that, we cannot overrule or we cannot overemphasize, the role which individual, scrutiny of each company, we cannot overemphasize the need for that. And so we need to look at it in this perspective that yes, small is the new big, but then we cannot paint all MSMEs in the same picture. Again, going back to the, middle, the fat middle, right? a family with an annual income of 5 lakh is a part of middle class. A family with an annual income of 50 lakh is also a part of middle class, right? But the needs are very, very different, right? Their consumption story, their saving behavior is different. Same is the case, a MSMED, right? In terms of a company with a top line of 5 crore, now a company with a top line of 500 crore. Both are going to be classified as SMEs. But the behavior, the financial strength, the business model, the kind of output which it would give, the potential which you would see in that company as an investor, vastly different. So we cannot use the same brush. And having said this context, I would want to now take you through a brief on SME IPOs. Sir has already mentioned about NSE. I don't need to mention further about our credentials. But what I want to mention here is the stock exchange only for the big guys? Only for the Hyundais and the ITCs and the NTPCs of the world? It's not the case. Last year, out of the total number of IPOs which we've done, about last calendar year, we did about 178 IPOs of 178 IPOs, of which about 140 were the SME IPOs. So now, in terms of numbers, again, this is like the fat middle. You have high number of companies, right? But overall, they add to a lot lesser with a very strong potential. So why is small the new big? Collectively, these SMEs contribute about 45% of exports. Again, the operational word being collective, right? Contribute to about 30% of our GDP. And most importantly, they are a very significant backbone to our economy, especially in the informal sector, the blue-collar, right? And the pain point for MSMEs has always been access to capital. This is something which I have been hearing for the last 10 years, that this has been a pain point. I think it's collectively our responsibility as by far, members of the financial fraternity to make sure that this ceases to be a pain point. If we were to connect 10 years hence, I think we should see a completely different picture of how access to capital is for MSMEs. Because these MSMEs lack scale, they still operate with traditional methods and often are, unable to survive an economic downturn or survive attempts of competition which is threatening them. So this is the perspective. From here on, what I would want to take you through very briefly is about the SME exchange, what we call as NSE Emerge. This is our platform which is dedicated to SMEs to raise capital. Started in September of 2012. We saw the first listing on the 18th of September 2012. And recently, we have achieved the milestone of 602nd listing. Interesting perspective here is that the initial 300 listings took about 10.5 years. So the first 300 listings took about 10.5 years, and the last 300 have come in just below 2 years. So this is a platform which has gained a lot of traction. Like Sir said, we've seen number of issuers as well as investors from the tier 2 and tier 3 cities get a lot of interest in this market. We did the first listing, so in the last year, we've seen listings from tier 2 cities, 10 listings from different cities. We've seen Himmatnagar, we've seen Bilaspur, we've seen Ratlam, Surat, Ludhiana. So this has been a trend which is also mirroring the trend of how the investor behavior is. Out of the 11 crore unique accounts which we have at NSE, the newer additions to this account has been from tier 2 cities, from tier 3 cities, and that's where again the power of the middle lies, the power of the SME. The backbone is truly in these cities. Totally, these 602 companies have raised about 16,000 crores of capital and have a market capitalization of 1,84,000. This was trending in the range of about 2.25, and due to the correction, this has also seen a downturn. The interesting statistic here is the companies which have migrated to the main board, right? And this is the success story which we want to see, that you start off being an SME. With the growth capital which you get here, you would want that scale to increase and to eventually become a larger enterprise, and that's where wealth creation is going to happen for the investors. In terms of eligibility criteria, the eligibility criteria defined by SEBI is from 10 to 25 crores of capital, the issuer can choose to be listed either on the SME board or the main board. Less than 10 crore, you have to be on the SME board, and greater than 25, you have to be on the main board. Overarching this is the internal eligibility criteria by the exchange. We stipulate a minimum of 3 years of operational history, a minimum of 1 crore of EBITDA in 2 out of the 3 preceding financial years, positive net worth as on the date of filing the DRHP, and that the company should have a positive free cash flow to equity in 2 out of the last 3 financial years. As said, recently there has been a change from SEBI, and we are expecting those to get codified very soon too. I'll go into a bit more depth on both of these. So the changes which have come is there's a definition of a minimum of 1 crore of EBITDA in 2 out of the last 3 financial years. There's been a cap on the offer for sale, right? Which is that it can't exceed 20%. Now think of it. On the one hand, we are saying that SMEs are lacking capital. There is not much access to capital. It's difficult for them to access capital. And on the other hand, if you say that SME promoters through this route can withdraw their funds or can get an exit, doesn't add up, right? The SME exchange or the SME platform is for raising fresh capital essentially, right? But again, there are new age companies where promoters would have invested stake, or there would be institutional investors who have given stake. So then to retain that upside for them, the OFS is permitted with a cap of 20%. The lock-in has been eased from 100%, which was there a year ago. Now it is 50-50%. There was no segregation between big and small NIIs, and now this allocation methodology has been aligned with the main board. GCP has been capped at 15%, so general corporate purposes, again, just using an overarching terminology without a clear end use, right, difficult for a monitoring purpose, right? Repayment of loan from promoter and promoter group, earlier there was no cap on it, although we at the exchange had a more stringent scrutiny of such end users, and now this is not permitted as per the regulation itself. Again, taking back to the point of unregulated financial advisors offering their 2 cents on the open of an IPO, right? This is something which was, earlier a sour taste at the beginning of an IPO. Now that there is a clear-cut mechanism that the IPO, the DRHP has to be made available to the public for their comments for 21 days. Again, those companies, the next is the paid-up capital, where the company's paid-up capital was about 24 or nearing 25 crores, and they needed further capital. There was a situation where they couldn't continue on the SME exchange, but again, they couldn't migrate to the main board. Now that has been solved. They can continue to remain on the SME exchange and have to comply with the requirements of the main board. And there is now disclosure requirement of RPT, which has been made aligned with the main board requirement. I'll delve a little bit into free cash flow, since all of your the members are all chartered accountants. I don't need to get into too much of detailing. But the perspective, I'll just give a perspective. I'm not explaining the formula here. I'll just give a perspective of why we introduced free cash flow to equity. Now, if you look at the free cash flow to equity as a measure, right, it starts with cash flow from operations. And cash flow from operations starts with profitability. So the first thing which this is going to evaluate is how profitable is the business. Is the business generating profit? So we start from PAT, add back the non-cash and non-operating items. So what is a core operating profit which is being generated by the business? How efficiently is the business managing its working capital requirement? So add to that, how is the working capital? So it often can happen that in the quest to show better numbers of the financial year ended, there is more orders which are taken in the month of March, and then there's a piling of receivables, or there's more inventory which is procured, you show that, and then there's a piling of inventory. And both of these will help improve the profit number, but not necessarily the cash flow number. So the idea is to see how much is the cash which is being generated out of the business, which is visible from its profitability and its working capital management. The other thing is how much is the company's investment in capex, because unless you're doing regular investment in capex, right, your scale is not going to go up, you aren't going to be able to fend off competition, and if we are talking of an enterprise being a growth enterprise, that investment in capex is what is going to unlock the future, opportunities. So what is the investment which is done in capex, right? That is what is netted off out of the cash flow from operations. Now the question will come that if I am a growing company and if my sales is increasing, my receivables are going to increase, my inventory is going to increase, and obviously I'm going to have more capex, right? It will never happen that I'll have a free cash flow which is positive. Logically, when inventories increase, when receivables increase, and if my capex is going to keep going up, probably I'm never going to have free cash flow. That's where the debt holders come in, right? The ideal funding mix in an enterprise cannot be too much reliance on debt. It cannot be too much reliance on equity also. Effectively, equity is the most expensive source of funding for an organization. So then there has to be an ideal mix between equity and debt. How effectively are the long-term requirements of capex being managed by long-term funds, which is in the form of loans, right? So effectively now if you see the whole thing, profitability, working capital management, capex, and the funding of the capex. So we have a measure free cash flow to equity, which takes into consideration all of these factors. It's a very often used terminology in the PE and VC world, which gives you a ringside view of the entirety of the operations of that, right? Both the operational performance and the financials. So operational leverage and the financial leverage which is there, how it is being managed by that business. So our criteria is that it needs to be positive in 2 out of the 3 years. There's no amount which is defined in this. In terms of the stage at which a company can ideally approach here, at the bottom we have, I would like you to see the graph from a bottom up. So as the company starts off, it starts off with its own equity. As a promoter, you would put in your own equity, you would probably be bootstrapped, you would probably get funds from friends and families, right? That is at your product stage, when you have designed a product, developed a product, right? As you find market, so the next stage is when you have it at an early stage, where you see that this is my product, I have tested it in this market. Am I finding acceptance for my product in this market? And I'm probably, that is where I am at the early stage, where I'll get support from probably a debt. So when you do your initial, setting up of a factory, you could take the help of a bank loan, right? Or you would see angel investors, long-term investors, HNIs, family offices, government seed funds invest into your venture here. This is where you are basically looking for a viable market. And from this stage, when you found a viable market, when you have seen that yes, there is demand, my product has found acceptance, and now at my growth stage, what I need is capital to scale this up rapidly, right? And that's the stage where an SME IPO can come in, where it is for the purpose of ramping up. Had you probably grown organically, it may have taken say 5 to 7 years for you to capture a certain part of the market share. And an injection of capital at this stage will help you fasten that journey. It will help it, probably cut it down from 7 odd years to about 2 odd years. So growth capital is what is there from the SME IPO stage. Again, with the infusion of equity, the leverage metrics will look much better, which will give comfort to the bankers, and they can join hands in jointly funding your expansion project. As the company grows to a larger company, it becomes much more, bigger in terms of scale, and then it is fit for a main board to raise capital from the larger retail public. A comparison between main board and SME, I've mentioned about the paid up capital and the operational profit of 1 crore and FCFE in the last 2 to 3 years. Now this slide generally elicits a question from me, is that how are loss-making companies invest raising funds, right? We saw the likes of Swiggy, Brainbees, we have GoDigit, we have many more new age tech companies lined up. The differentiating factor is that they are listed on the main board under a regulation 6.2, by which minimum there is a 75% subscription of the QIB portion. Now when QIBs, so QIBs, qualified institutional buyers, they are the informed investors. They understand the risks of the new age businesses, and when they are investing, it gives comfort to the regulator that they know the business in which they are investing. We cannot apply the same yardstick to the SME exchange. I'd like to ask a question here. In terms of risk of failure, what do you think is higher in main board listed companies or SME listed companies? Where do you think is the risk of failure of the business higher? In SME listed companies, right? So that's again one of the reasons why when the enterprise is small, it's subject to a lot more threat, both in terms of profitability, simple survival. One economic downturn can erode the net worth and push it back. It may probably be a question of, you know, existence for such enterprises. And that is exactly the reason why the emphasis is on showing profitability, showing that there is an operational history, you've survived a couple of downturns at least, and there is a significant track record to show. So that is the reason why there is a difference in the approach to the main board and the SME segments. Post-listing disclosures, of course. So then if you were to look at it, eligibility-wise, there is much more stringency in the SME segment vis-a-vis the main board segment. But from a post-listing requirement, often these SMEs you would have experienced, right? The promoter is someone who is technically qualified, right? He knows his product, he knows his market, he knows his game. But his weak point has always been financing, accounting, disclosures, right? And so from that perspective, the requirement from a listing, post-listing compliance is a slightly light touch as opposed to the main board, with semi-annual disclosures required in the SME as opposed to the quarterly disclosures of the main board. Again, like you rightly said, the risk of failure in an SME company is much higher than that of a main board company, which is why if you see the minimum lot size for an SME to an investor who wants to invest in an SME stock, the minimum lot size is 1 lakh and above, which is about 15,000 for the main board. So again, which means that an investor who knows that I have to set aside 1 lakh for each trade which I have to do, right, will mean that I have that much ability to withstand the erosion of 1 lakh plus of capital. Only they should be permitted to invest in the SME IPO. That's the rationale behind, right? I mentioned about this. In terms of the journey, the company starts with an interaction with our team, which is the business development team. The merchant bankers play a crucial role here, right? They are the ones who would guide the company in terms of how to prepare the disclosures which are required in the DRHP. The DRHP document is essentially the kundali of the company which comes to us. It should contain all the details about the business, the risk factors, the financial performance, the reasons why you're raising this by way of the objects of the issue. It should be clear, concise, and not have exaggerated, representations. Once the offer document is filed with the exchange, the business development team and the regulatory team work in complete independence, right? It's a rare occasion when we are, of course, speaking separately at the same forum, right? The due diligence is an in-depth one. I think there's going to be further panel discussion which will throw more light on the entire process which is done from the regulatory perspective. After the entire due diligence process, the in-principle approval is granted. This in-principle approval stays valid for a year, and any time in that 1 year period, depending on the market condition and the requirement of funds, the company can open its IPO. 3 days, generally 3 days is when, 3 to 10 days is the window of IPO open to close. And after 3 days of the close of the IPO, the company would be listing on the exchange. As a SME promoter, now, of course, in the financial terminology, one of the biggest benefits of raising equity vis-a-vis raising debt is that there is no overhang of, monthly EMI which needs to be paid to the bank, right? So that often gives a lot of flexibility to the company to be able to manage its operations better. There are some businesses where the payoff will come significantly into the future. You take up something now, you start your project now, you start your inroads into a market, maybe it'll take you 6 to 8 months for that project to start delivering returns. If you have a meter ticking of the interest which has to be serviced every month, it may be difficult to manage such enterprises. So from a financial perspective, this is something which you don't have to repay. But let me ask you this question here again then. Does it mean that it is free money? It's certainly not free money. It's by far the most expensive form of funding which you can. As an investor, you would want to take at least as much. You would expect a return at least as much as what the debt holders are expecting. Definitely more than that, because the risk of failure is essentially with the equity holders, right? So it's not free money. It is just that you don't have to repay, but you certainly have to multiply. That is definitely something which the investor will expect. But financials aside, there are a lot of intangible benefits which come from listing. Visibility, access to wider network, access being discovered by export markets. So we've had instances where listed issuers have come and told us that I've got a call from an European company, and he was able to discover me because I was listed to a enterprise or to a business which is in a different country, right? Having a listed business counterpart adds a lot of credibility, because there is going to be that stamp of approval that yes, this is at least meeting a certain standards, right, in terms of its financial and in terms of its corporate governance, in terms of its disclosures. It's easier to hire talent once you are listed, because the ESOPs will have value. You can unlock value out of those ESOPs. Things like the hits on your company's website after getting listed, the hits on the company's LinkedIn page, ability to access talent, all of these are intangible benefits which come with getting listed, right? And it helps if your perspective changes from being a promoter to and trustee of the the trust which your partners who are going to take a stake in your company is met. Just a quick start, like we said, last year we did a total last financial of 138 companies and raising collectively about 4,600 crores. In this financial year till January, we are already crossed that number of 147, and we've already raised about 6,200 crores. But this number comes with a lot of responsibility. I dot this back to my earlier remark that we cannot brush all the companies with the same brush. Each individual issuer, each individual issue has to be, analyzed on its own merits. The trend which we had seen in the last few years, look at the number from post-COVID. 1920 SME IPOs were oversubscribed about maximum 1.5 to 2 times, 1.66. And look at the number in the last financial year, 256 times oversubscription. It's not a healthy sign, right? Interest in the market is a good one, but it has to be sustained. We cannot kill a golden goose, right? It is for us collectively to make sure that this market remains, the trust in this market is, maintained. And so, again, I emphasize each issue has to be evaluated and brought up to, the market in its entirety. I'll show one more statistic here, which is our SME Emerge Index, given a total return of about 39% since inception, but a healthy correction underway since January in this, right? In terms of the representation, this is across industries. There's no one overhang which we've seen. New age and old age industries, so we have media, we have IT, all of these representing the overall index. I'd like to close my remark here with this emphasis that it is an illiquid market. It is a market where there is risk of failure of these enterprises, both as the fraternity which is working to bring these issuers onto the platform and as someone who would be advising investors on this. Please be mindful that this bears risk and this needs to be, evaluated, and you need to be having the stomach to take this. It's a high beta market, and so only investors with adequate risk appetite and having adequate guardrails in the entire framework. That's something which we at, as a regulator would like to keep repeating, that there are requirements of adequate guardrails to be there so that this, exchange thrives. So that's what I had to say. So thank you so much for your attention, and I wish you continued learning through the day. I doubt we'll be able to take any Q&A considering the time, but I'm here very much. So if there's something during the networking session you wish to discuss with me, I'm very much here. Thank you so much.